Hey, first grade. Some of you might remember that we were reading the story of Edward Tulane when we stopped going to school around spring break. And I'm going to read you a different book now. I don't think Edward Tulane's the best choice for kind of being at home and us not being together. So I chose a different story, and it's called Henry Huggins. And some of you may have heard this story before or heard of this character. If you remember at the beginning of the year, we read the book Ramona and Beezus. And Henry was a friend of Beezus's. He lived on Ramona's and Beezus's street. And so we're going to learn about Henry and his dog. And I will record every day just a little bit of reading, just like you would listen to a chapter book at school after lunch every day. So you can listen to this anytime you want, or you can listen to it right after lunch, just like when we would be at school. And I have to read this book on my phone, which is very strange to me, but I don't have a bunch of chapter books at home because my boys don't read chapter books yet, so that'll be a little bit different. If there are any illustrations, I will be sure to show you, but otherwise we'll kind of just listen to a story together like we always do. All right, chapter 1, Henry and Ribs. Henry Huggins was in the 3rd grade. His hair looked like a scrubbing brush, and most of his grown-up front teeth were in. He lived with his mother and father in a square white house on Klickitat Street. Remember, that's where Ramona and Beezus lived. Except for having his tonsils out when he was 6 and breaking his arm falling out of a cherry tree when he was 7, nothing much happened to Henry. I wish something exciting would happen, Henry often thought. But nothing very interesting ever happened to Henry, at least not until one Wednesday afternoon in March. Every Wednesday after school, Henry rode downtown on the bus to go swimming at the YMCA. After he swam for an hour, he got on the bus again and rode home just in time for dinner. It was fun, but not really exciting. When Henry left the YMCA on this particular Wednesday, he stopped to watch a man tear down a circus poster. Then, with 3 nickels and 1 dime in his pocket, he went to the corner drugstore to buy a chocolate ice cream cone. He thought he would eat the ice cream cone, get on the bus, drop his dime in the slot, and ride home. That is not what happened. He bought the ice cream cone and paid for it with one of his nickels. On his way out of the drugstore, he stopped to look at funny books. It was a free look because he only had 2 nickels left. He stood there licking his chocolate ice cream cone and reading one of the funny books when he heard a thump, thump, thump. Henry turned, and there behind him was a dog. The dog was scratching himself. He wasn't any kind of special dog. He was too small to be a big dog, but on the other hand, he was much too big to be a little dog. He wasn't a white dog because parts of him were brown and other parts were black, and in between there were yellowish patches. His ears stood up and his tail was long and thin. The dog was hungry. When Henry licked, he licked. When Henry swallowed, he swallowed. Oh, here's an illustration. Oh, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it. I'll do my best. It's kind of a glare on the screen. "Hello, you old dog," Henry said. "You can't have my ice cream cone." Swish, swish, swish went the tail. "Just 1 bite," the dog's brown eyes seemed to say. "Go away," ordered Henry. He wasn't very firm about it. He patted the dog's head. The tail wagged harder. Henry took 1 last lick. "Oh, all right," he said. "If you're that hungry, you might as well have it." The ice cream cone disappeared in 1 gulp. "Now, go away," Henry told the dog. "I have to catch a bus for home." He started for the door, and the dog started too. "Go away, you skinny old dog." Henry didn't say it very loudly. "Go on home." The dog sat down at Henry's feet. Henry looked at the dog, and the dog looked at Henry. "Oh, I don't think you've got a home. You're awful thin. Your ribs show right through your skin." "Thump, thump, thump," replied the tail. "And you haven't got a collar," said Henry. He began to think. If only he could keep the dog. He'd always wanted a dog of his very own, and now he'd found a dog that wanted him. He couldn't go home and leave a hungry dog on the street corner. If only he knew what his mother and father would say. He fingered the 2 nickels in his pocket. That was it! He would use one of the nickels to phone his mother. "Come on, Ribsy. Come on, Ribs, old boy. I'm going to call you Ribsy because you're so thin." The dog trotted after the boy to the telephone booth in the corner of the drugstore. Henry shoved him into the booth and shut the door. He had never used a pay telephone before. So back in the day, when we wanted to make phone calls, we didn't always have phones in our pockets. and you had to go to a phone on a wall at a store and put money in it to make a phone call. Can you believe that? And when I was growing up, I think it was a quarter. This is much older than me. Can you believe that? Something older than me. And Henry had to put in a nickel, which doesn't seem like very much to call home. They didn't have cell phones back then. Hello, Mom? Why, Henry, his mother sounded surprised. Where are you? At the drugstore near the Y. Ribs began to scratch. Thump, thump, thump. Inside the telephone booth, the thumps sounded loud and hollow. Oh, for goodness sake. Henry, what's that noise? His mother demanded. Ribs began to whimper and then to howl. Henry, Mrs. Huggins shouted, are you all right? Yes, I'm all right, Henry shouted back. He never could understand why his mother always thought something had happened to him when nothing ever did. That's just Ribsy. Ribsy? His mother was exasperated. Henry, will you please tell me what's going on? I'm trying to, said Henry. Ribsy howled louder. People were gathering around the phone booth to see what was going on. Mother, I found a dog. I sure wish I could keep him. He's a good dog, and I'd feed him and wash him and everything. Please, Mom? I don't know, dear, his mother said. You'll have to ask your father. Mom, Henry wailed. That's what you always say. Henry was tired of standing on tiptoe, and the phone booth was getting warm. Mom, please say yes, and I'll never ask for another thing as long as I live. Well, all right, Henry, I guess there isn't any reason why you shouldn't have a dog, but you'll have to bring him home on the bus. Your father has the car today, and I can't come after you. Can you manage? Sure, easy. And Henry, please don't be late. It looks like it's going to rain. All right, Mom. Thump, thump, thump. Henry, what's that thumping noise? It's my dog, Ribsy. He's scratching a flea. Oh, Henry, Mrs. Huggins moaned. Couldn't you have found a dog without fleas? Henry thought this was a good time to hang up. Come on, Ribs, he said. We're going home on the bus. When the big green bus stopped in front of the drugstore, Henry picked up his dog. Ribsy was heavier than he expected. He had a hard time getting him into the bus and was wondering how he could get a dime out of his pocket when the driver said, Say, Sonny, you can't take that dog on the bus. Why not? Asked Henry. It's a company rule, Sonny. No dogs on buses. Well, golly, mister, how am I going to get him home? I just have to get him home. Sorry, Sonny. I didn't make the rule. No animal can ride on the bus unless it's inside a box. Oh, well, thanks anyway, said Henry doubtfully, and lifted Ribsy off the bus. Well, I guess we'll have to get a box. I'll get you on to the next bus somehow, promised Henry. He went back into the drugstore, followed closely by Ribsy. Have you got a big box I could have, please? He asked the man at the toothpaste counter. I need one big enough for my dog. The clerk leaned over the counter to look at Ribsy. A cardboard box? He asked. Yes, please, said Henry, wishing the man would hurry. He didn't want to be late getting home. The clerk pulled a box out from under the counter. This hair tonic carton is the only one I have. I guess it's big enough, but why would anyone want to put a dog in a cardboard box? I can't understand. The box was about 2 feet square and 6 inches deep. On one end was printed, Don't let them call you Baldy, and on the other, Try our large economy size. Henry thanked the clerk, carried the box out to the bus stop, and put it on the sidewalk. Ribsy padded after him. Get in, fella, Henry commanded. Ribsy understood. He stepped into the box and sat down, just as the bus came around the corner. Henry had to kneel to pick up the box. It was not a very strong box, and he had to put his arms under it. He staggered as he lifted it, feeling like a strong man who lifted weights at the circus. Ribsy lovingly licked his face with his wet pink tongue. Hey, cut that out, Henry ordered. You better be good if you're going to ride on the bus with me. The bus stopped at the curb. When it was Henry's turn to get on, he had trouble finding the step because he couldn't see his feet. He had to try several times before he hit it. Then he discovered he'd forgotten to take his dime out of his pocket. He was afraid to put the box down for fear Ribsy might escape. He turned sideways to the driver and asked politely, Will you please take the dime out of my pocket for me? My hands are full. The driver pushed his cap back on his head and exclaimed, Full? I should say they're full. And just where do you think you're going with that animal? Home? Said Henry in a small voice. The passengers were staring, and most of them were smiling. The box was getting heavier every minute. Can you still? It's so hard to see the pictures. I hate that. Not on this bus, you're not, said the driver. But the man on the last bus said I could take the dog. On the bus, in a box, protested Henry, who was afraid he couldn't hold the dog much longer. He said it was a company rule. He meant a big box tied shut, a box with holes punched in it for the dog to breathe through. Henry was horrified to hear Ribsy growl. Hush up, he ordered. Ribsy began to scratch his left ear with his left hind foot. The box began to tear. Ribsy jumped out of the box and off the bus, and Henry jumped after him. The bus pulled away with a puff of exhaust. Now see what you've done. You spoiled everything. The dog hung his head and tucked his tail between his legs. If I can't get you home, how can I keep you? We'll have to leave it there, and we'll read some more tomorrow.